We are going to start the reading with David Bezmozgis. Sorry, David. So put your hands together.
Okay, nice to be here. Bear with me while I adjust this thing. Okay. I'm going to read part of my new novel, The Free World, which is set in Rome in 1978, follows a family of Soviet Jews who leave the Soviet Union en route to North America. The book is told in three voices, so the family is three generations traveling together. There is the patriarch, who is 65 years old, a devoted communist, then his youngest son, sort of a womanizer, kind of charming, free-spirited womanizer, and we'll hear from him. And the third voice is his young wife, named Paulina, who's actually not Jewish, but is traveling with this family. And I'm going to read an excerpt, kind of in the first third of the book, just so to set it up. So they leave the Soviet Union, they end up in Rome. From there they have to apply to go to someplace, Canada or the US. And some people got jobs, and we're going to read about, you're going to hear about what Alec, who is the youngest son, the job that he gets. And, the excerpt is, sort of a very typical, very common cultural misunderstanding. All right, so we'll go ahead. On the third day at the briefing department, standing before the newly arrived émigrés at their cafeteria orientation, Alec felt like a fraud. He felt tempted to confess that, not 1 week before, he had been sitting in their place and that he knew no more about Rome than they did. But he was aware that this kind of revelation would only sow panic. After the orientation, Alec made the rounds of the émigrés' hotel rooms. He distributed U.S. immigration forms, priming people for their persecution stories, and if necessary, their party stories. And by party stories, it's not like how I partied in the Soviet Union, but it's like, oh, I was a member of the Communist Party, and I didn't mean it. Yeah. Some people came prepared with a vast catalog of grievances that they had been compiling their entire lives. Others needed some interpretive assistance. A couple from Berdichev found the concept particularly boggling. The wife looked at Alec like he was obtuse. What do we need this for? Nobody's saying you need it. The Americans need it. You're claiming refugee status. To be a refugee, you have to have been persecuted. The entire country was persecuted. Did you and your husband attend university? Yes, both of us. Was it the university of your choice? I was not an exceptional student. I had no grand designs. Okay, and your husband? He has a good head for academics. He wanted to study history. He wasn't accepted. Not into that faculty. How come? What do you mean, how come? Look at his nose. Alec landed in the briefing department after a brisk evaluation by Matilda Levy. She had walked him through the high-ass offices while rattling off the various positions and personalities. Constantine is our messenger, Matilda said when they passed the table reserved for the messenger. He's going to Canada. After 1 month, he could find his way without the aid of a map, not only in Ostia and Ladispoli, but also in Rome. At the doors of the transportation department, a room that smelled strongly of body odor, cigarettes, and fried food, Matilda Levy introduced Alec to 3 of the 4 men who worked there. They looked up from their particular stacks of documents and submitted to the introduction in a cursory way, disguising not at all their displeasure at having to engage in the formality of greeting a superfluous person. The 4th man, Matilda explained, was at the dockyards, coordinating the movement of freight. The slightest mistake and you had a disaster. A family lands in New York, but their dining room set lands in Melbourne. You do not seem to me an imposing man, Matilda said. Imposing? Alec asked, not understanding. A man to give orders to other men, Matilda said. No, they would eat you alive on the docks. As neither the docks nor the musty office held any appeal for him, Alex saw no reason to contest Matilda Levy's perception of him. Besides, she was essentially correct. His father was imposing and enjoyed issuing decrees and orders. Carl, his older brother, had this capacity as well, although he didn't derive the kind of pleasure from it that their father did. Whereas the only thing Alec detested more than being ordered around was having to order someone else around. Basically, he was of the opinion that the world would be a far more interesting and hospitable place if everyone, genius and idiot alike, was allowed to bumble along as he pleased. Hold on. All right. There. More freedom to bumble neatly described his motive for leaving the Soviet Union. You're the type that prefers the company of women, Matilda Levy said as they stepped away from the transportation department. Is this correct? They stopped in the hallway, and Matilda Levy peered boldly into Alec's eyes, squinting slightly as if in this way to achieve a better vantage into his innermost character. Yes, it is correct. I've always preferred the company of women, Alex said. And after hesitating one instant too long, smiled. The smile Alec immediately felt was a mistake. Under Matilda Levy's peculiar scrutiny, and under the demands of a foreign language, he had momentarily been unable to act like himself. He had intended only to deliver a simple statement in the English language and season it with a little charm, but had instead, because of the yawning gap between his words and his smile, presented for Matilda Levy's consideration a man who was either licentious or deranged or some combination of the two. Matilda Levy seemed to regard him ruminatively. Yes, she said, I believe it is so. Alec wasn't sure what she meant, what was so. He had temporarily lost track of what they had been talking about. Matilda Levy appeared before him transformed, as though she had stepped out from behind some scrim that had been obscuring a more vital Matilda Levy. Alex sensed that she was now differently disposed to him. They were no longer administrative and prospective employee, but rather woman and man with complementary desires and bodies. For Alex's consideration, Matilda Levy presented the physical Matilda Levy, hips, breasts, legs, hairdo, adorned with nylons, necklaces, bracelets, bulky rings, and lipstick. Saying nothing further, Matilda Levy swept around and, wielding her bosom like a prow, sailed down the hall to the stairwell and beyond. Alec followed in her wake. It had been a long time since he had found himself in this position. More often he led the way. Other times the act of seduction was performed in a spirit of mutuality. Nobody led. Hand in hand, both tumbled together. But Alec couldn't imagine himself tumbling hand in hand with Matilda Levy. He could imagine other scenarios, though these, even cast in the most favorable light, were either comic or absurd. Nevertheless, as Matilda reached the bottom of the stairwell and crossed 4 lanes of traffic, Alec felt that he had to seriously consider the possibility. Could it be that his job with Hyas was conditional upon becoming Matilda Levy's lover? Far stranger things happened with astounding regularity. His mother's cousin, raided by the police, once tried to swallow an inventory list. When one of the officers attempted to pry it out of his mouth, he bit off the policeman's finger. Compared with that, sleeping with Matilda Levy for a middling job at Hyas seemed perfectly reasonable. And with every successive step Alec took, he asked himself, should I do it? The answer, of course, resided in the question. If you asked yourself if you should do it, you shouldn't do it. Matilda Levy inserted a key into the lock of a nondescript building and stepped inside the shadowy lobby. She didn't look back to check whether Alec was behind her. She pressed ahead with implacable resolve, as if everything was foregone and settled, as if she and Alec had come to an agreement. Alec suspected that maybe he had agreed supposed that he'd agreed to more than he'd suspected. Between a man and a woman, the merest look has sexual implications. For all he knew, Matilda Levy could have taken his smile for a marriage proposal. He thought to say something, to clarify his position in some diplomatic way, to alter the tone, but Matilda Levy's silent determination discouraged talk. In spite of all this, Alec found himself inspecting the lobby for suitably concealed corners where the act could be consummated. This was purely reflexive, a consequence of Soviet privation. It was one thing to attract a woman, quite another to find a place where you could be together undisturbed. One time, in a bind, he had convinced a girl to climb up onto the broad bough of an oak tree. She'd feared falling, tearing her dress, losing a shoe. He'd had to reassure her and also hoist her up on his shoulders. She wasn't a large girl, but neither was she a natural climber. "What are we, squirrels?" the girl had complained. "If only," Alex said. But this was the way it was with any human endeavor, great or small. One had to be blessed with a skill for it. Some people were good with numbers, others never forgot a face, others still had perfect pitch. As for himself, he could usually find a decent, serviceable place to copulate. Naturally, if you had such a skill, you couldn't simply turn it off. In this respect, it was like being a thief or a spy, habitually taking stock of your surroundings. Even in the presence of Matilda Levy, Alex still couldn't help but notice that there was, to the left of the mailboxes, a narrow hallway that branched off at an obtuse angle and led to only 2 apartments. In his estimation at this time of day, that hallway represented better than average odds. And, like a thief or a spy, Alec felt the nagging temptation to try his luck to see if his instincts were still sharp. Matilda Levy stepped into the elevator and pressed the call button. An instant later, a light blinked, and Matilda pulled open the iron door. She waited imperiously for Alec to join her. Once he was inside, she dropped a coin into the mechanism and pressed a button for the 4th floor. The door glided back into place, clicked shut, and the elevator crept dramatically up. As it made its slow ascent, the compartment grew dense with Matilda Levy's cosmetics and perfume. The air became constricting, intimate, and glandular. The elevator felt less like an elevator than like Matilda Levy's laundry basket. Just standing there, Alec felt compromised. In his mind, in spite of himself, he began to envision it happening. He unclasped her necklace, unbuttoned her blouse, and asked her to stand at a short remove, and watched her unzip her skirt and step clear in garters, nylons, and heels. At the 4th floor, the elevator lurched to a halt, and Matilda Levy reached out and retracted the door. "Your hand, please," Matilda said at the threshold of the open door. The elevator had stopped some 30 centimeters short of the landing, creating a visible, though far from insurmountable obstacle. It was, in actuality, no higher than a normal step, but Matilda Levy stood arrested before it with one hand outstretched, awaiting assistance. Alec wondered if they had now reached the decisive point at which, in no uncertain terms, the sexual proposal was slapped down on the table like a fish. It was when one person asked the other to do something unnecessary, for instance, to leave a party, to climb a tree, to gratuitously lend a hand out of an elevator. But what to do, Alec thought. He couldn't tell Matilda Levy that he believed she could get out of the elevator by herself. Alec gave her his hand. "The machine is not perfect," Matilda said, "but what it lacks in function, it makes up in character." Using Alec's hand for support, Matilda Levy climbed out onto the landing and took several steps down the corridor, and again waited for Alec. With every apartment they passed, Alec resigned himself more and more to the inevitability. It would be a charitable act, no crime against Paulina. Behind the door of the first apartment, Alec heard the voice of an Italian broadcaster, either on the radio or on television. The next apartment they passed was silent. Behind the door of the third, he heard the clink of plates. Matilda Levy stopped at the 4th door and withdrew her keys. From the beginning, Alec had considered it oddly coincidental that she would have her apartment so close to the Hyas offices. On the other hand, it was quite possible that this was not her primary apartment. Unlike Riga, Rome had no municipal commissions dictating how many residences a person could have. It was a free country. A person could have as many residences as he could afford. It was completely within the realm of possibility that Matilda Levy might keep an apartment across the road from the Hyas offices for the sole purpose of conducting trysts with Russian émigrés. Matilda Levy turned the key and opened the door. Alec looked inside, expecting to see one thing, but saw instead several young Italian women reading documents, organizing files, and using a large photocopier. Among them were two middle-aged Russian men, one of whom wore impressively thick eyeglasses. "This is the briefing department," Matilda Levy said, "responsible for intake and processing. The work done here is very important. Most people consider it a desirable position. But the last man we hired was very rude to the girls. He had some kind of complex, a very difficult character. I don't tolerate rudeness to the girls. They are sweet girls and work very hard. But I don't expect such a problem with you. I can see that already. A woman knows. Now as for what you need to learn, ask Oleg in the glasses or Lucia in the white skirt." The office looked fine, and the prospect of working with 10 Italian girls was pleasing. But mainly, Alec felt like a man reprieved. The day's report would remain unblemished. What happened today? Nothing bad. Which was the way of the world between misunderstandings, bankruptcies, and stomach cancers. Thank you.
Coma, 2006. Dans la nuit du 8 au 9 décembre 1981, une amie du voisinage m'apporte un bol de soupe. Je ne couche plus alors que sur mon lit de camp de l'armée, près de la porte. Je fais cette nuit un long rêve où Beethoven compose et fait jouer devant lui des morceaux d'un quatuor inédit. Son souffle chaud entoure, enveloppe ma tête. Des restes de repas fument sur une table au fond. Les musiciens jeunes à l'intérieur du demi-cercle, avec des joues pleines, âgées et chenues sur les bords de l'ensemble, jouent la musique presque impondérable, silencieuse, que B, leur tend en grand feuillet au frottement très sonore depuis le piano. L'image du tableau se brouille parce que je m'évanouis sur la chaise où j'écoute. Mon front, mes tempes portent sur le carrelage. Je ressens de très loin la poussée des muscles de mes jambes, le traînement de ma joue sur le carreau, la butée de mon crâne sur le bas de la porte. C'est à l'intérieur de ce rêve que je me sens mourir, et c'est une empreinte d'ange qui marque le sol et le bas de la porte, l'aile. C'est le matin. Après, c'est à la déclaration le 13 de l'état de guerre en Pologne, pays natal d'enfance et d'adolescence de notre mère, que je peux rouvrir les yeux et bouger mes lèvres, au moins le temps d'une visite ou deux. Et c'est la nuit suivante, dans les soubresauts de la reprise de connaissance et de la redescente dessous, apnée, dyspnée, comme au-dessous et au-dessus, d'un côté et de l'autre, du liquide amniotique, que commence le voyage athlétique. Je suis dans une salle de réanimation à l'hôpital Brousset. Ayant alors mon peu de corps sanglé sur le lit mécanique, ayant les narines, la bouche et autres encombrées de tuyaux, de pinces, j'ai comme le mort aux dents et je m'entends dans le coma soufflé comme le plus robuste et le plus furieux des chevaux. Puis c'est une esplanade immense, en contrebas d'un bloc de montagnes triangulaires et brillantes. Acclamation de plusieurs foules divagantes et remuées comme en fond sous-marin. Est-ce moi-même qu'on acclame, mais de quoi? Hissé sur les points de l'une de ces foules, ou est-ce ce Rodo, un autre, debout, une tête seule derrière une haute tribune face à moi, regard noir et débit précipité? Pas de voix centrale, mais 4 échos cardinaux aigus d'un fantôme de voix lui sortant en écume de ses dents et séchant en cocon sur ses lèvres. Est-ce un effet du traitement dont je suis l'objet inanimé, intubation, sonde, tirée de membres, en externe et en interne, mais les fantômes des membres, des organes qui m'ont constitué de l'autre côté sont tirés, écartelés comme par les chevaux du supplice de Damien. Jadis enfant, lorsque l'été résonne et sent et palpite de partout, mon corps en même temps que mon moi commence de s'y circonscrire et donc de le former. Le bonheur de vivre, d'éprouver, de prévoir déjà le démembre. Tout de ce corps éclate, les neurones vont vers ce qui les sollicite, les zones de sensation se détachent presque en blocs qui se posent aux 4 coins du paysage, aux 4 coins de la création. Ou bien c'est la fusion avec le monde, ma disparition dans tout ce qui me touche, que je vois, et dans tout ce que je ne vois pas encore. Sans doute ne puis-je alors supporter de n'être qu'un seul moi, devant tous ces autres moi, et d'être immobile, malgré l'effervescence de mes sens, d'être immobile dans cet espace où l'on saute, s'élance, s'envole. Plutôt mourir, comme peut mourir un enfant, que de ne pas être multiple, voire multiple jusqu'à l'infini. Quelle douleur aussi de ne pouvoir se partager, être soi partagé comme un festin par tout ce qu'on désire manger, par toutes les sensations, par tous les êtres, cette dépouille déchiquetée de petit animal par terre, c'est moi, si ce pouvait être moi. Un atelier de supplice, des cris, des imprécations, des ordres femelles, des plaintes, des gémissements, des supplications qui se transforment en hurlements, en étouffements, en râles, des traînements, des chutes d'objets sur le carrelage, odeur. C'est, on me le dit plus tard, une vieille femme que les infirmières intubent, qui se relâche et dont on ramasse des excréments à la pelle. Puis, est-ce l'effet des transfusions, des perfusions avancées du glucose dans les veines qui changent mon sang? Je suis aspiré à grande vitesse dans un couloir, veine, d'espace, jeté au grand jour dans des décombres d'espace, puis repris par l'aspiration. Ces triturations, ces toboggans où je tourne aussi sur moi-même, me laissent comme des contusions, des courbatures que je ressens dans le songe lui-même. En effet, ce ne sont pas des rêves trop humains, mais des songes, rêves vécus, des prémonitions, des annonces, des jugements qui me saisissent et me renvoient d'un temps à l'autre, mais vers l'origine. Ce sont les articulations de mon âme qui me font souffrir, qui me cuisent, une âme articulée comme à la tête d'un attelage que mes bras doivent conduire avec ses sangles et ses rênes vers l'Égypte. À nouveau la chambre d'écho, d'un petit sursaut et d'une ouverture de mon œil, la vision des aérosols, des embouchures de tuyaux courbés vers moi avec leurs anneaux, serpents, chiens socles, entrant dans ma bouche, le dépôt, mais où? Pas de tablette au chevet du lit mécanique, d'objets, de lettres cachetées. Je suis dans une tombe de l'Égypte ancienne, avec ses sculptures domestiques, ses offrandes et ses messages. Faut-il alors remonter plus haut, dans un temps d'avant l'écriture, comme pour la prendre à revers, avant ces hiéroglyphes, dans ces signes dont l'histoire aurait effacé la signification, comme les miens dont le secret disparaît avec moi? L'âme n'a pas de genre ni d'espèce. Ainsi, dans ce voyage funéraire, suis-je humain? Suis-je animal? Suis-je Dieu? Suis-je objet, idée? J'ai toujours vu le regard d'un Dieu dans celui d'un chien, mais c'est bien moi qui ai écrit dans le tombeau ce cliché comme un petit chien qui me tourmente et à cause de quoi je voudrais et j'ai, je crois, la force de le souffler une nuit à mon ami M, que tout ce que j'ai pu écrire disparaisse de la surface de la terre. Ma punition, c'est que cette faute d'art demeure, et alors me voici, tiré et chutant dans un espace de colonnes, de péristyles et de tentures mouvantes, espace surélevé de temples-palais, au bas duquel les chiens attendent leur proie, une longue et forte vipère verte et or, dont le corps pend sur le mur et dont la tête fait face. Ainsi, enfant, jeune homme, Athalie, la reine, obstinément renégate et colère, une vipère qui pend d'un trou du mur de notre jardin. Que mon œil à nouveau s'ouvre, et c'est la vision d'un berlingot de jus de fruits, Réa, qui me ramène de force la poignée de cette déesse mère, épouse du temps, vers l'Antiquité, la période du moins, du temps d'avant la naissance de Jésus-Christ. Le temps de la mort, ce faux temps d'avant le Christ, cet espace-temps au bord duquel les soins médicaux me retiennent. Le mouvement des graphiques sur les écrans des appareils branchés à mon cœur et à mon cerveau figure à mes yeux qui se rouvrent avec peine tant les muscles des paupières ont fondu. Le tracé, la preuve de mes trajectoires historiques. Tout s'accomplit de ce dont, dans l'année, j'ai souffert la prémonition. Jusqu'à ceci, que les photographes qui ont cliché ma tête détruite, que les journaux ont reproduite, pour le regard de mes proches, sur le territoire national et au-delà, m'y accompagnent sans me prendre comme des monstres qu'ils resteront pour moi longtemps après. Fin décembre, je peux, une infirmière me retenant la tête sur le cou, m'asseoir au bord du lit. On me transfère de réanimation en médecine par un souterrain garni de tuyaux et de câbles qui passent sous une grande cour illuminée d'un grand soleil. Ma silhouette bascule comme une caricature sur le fauteuil roulant. En médecine, me voici dans le même couloir, à quelques portes de celle de la chambre où est morte la sœur de ma mère, fin 1979. En face de mon lit, un homme adulte, pâle, aux yeux gros, le crâne brillant, mange son repas sur sa tablette. Je suis devant un fond d'eau, de lac, et c'est une larve amphibienne que j'ai devant moi. Quelques heures après que la première érection, de quoi donc, entre mes hanches creusées, me remet dans l'atroce normalité, que confirme aussitôt l'infirmière qui me parle. Monsieur Guyotat? En février, transporté dans la clinique Jeanne d'Arc de Saint-Mandé, je commence ma renutrition. Ma peau me démange de partout. C'est la chair qui se reforme autour des muscles, des cartilages et des os. Après 2 jours de petite activité gymnastique et d'écriture, à nouveau cette détresse, mais en sens inverse, dans un corps qui se refait, sans la grandeur de la dégradation. Au soir d'un dimanche, les derniers visiteurs partis, l'interne de garde fait le guilleret devant moi, et comme à ce moment je peine encore à parler, me demande de répéter après lui le vers de Mallarmé, aboli, bibelot d'inanité sonore. Croit-il que je n'ai pas été capable, et le serais-je à nouveau, d'écrire aussi beau, aussi tintant et mélodieux, aussi désespérant, vanité de l'âme sonore, et moi, sur la longueur, mais lui, aboli, bibelot d'inanité sonore, me remettre en bouche, en cœur, en respiration, ce qui m'a tué, la splendeur qui m'a tué, desséché, ces sons tentateurs qui m'ont amené sous son ombre. Après la clinique, c'est l'entrée dans la dépression douce, la guérison lente. La récompense de cette traversée de la mort, c'est au lieu du palais enchanté que l'on croit avoir gagné à la sueur de son sang mort, un monde désenchanté, sans relief ni couleur notable, des regards ternes qui ne vous voient plus, des voix toujours adressées à d'autres que vous qui revenez de trop loin, une obligation quotidienne à survivre, un cœur qui ne fait passer que du sang et du sang qui ne chauffe plus. Il faut attendre, sans colère, s'appliquer à se nourrir, à dormir, à se laver, à se vêtir, à marcher, chaque jour, le tout presque seul et sans même soi-même à ses côtés. Essayer par à-coups, si gauche, de reprendre du cœur. Patience, patience.
This is a translation of this book, Coma, that was published by Samyotax in 2010, sorry. On the night of December 8th, a friend from the neighborhood brings me a bowl of soup. I now sleep exclusively on the cot I have kept from my army days near the door. I have a long dream that night in which Beethoven composes and directs pieces from an unpublished quartet. His warm breath surrounds and envelops my head. Steam wafts from the remains of dinner on a back table. Musicians, the young inside the half circle, plump cheeks, the older and graying along the sides, play the almost imponderable, silent music that B hands them from the piano in large sheets that crackle loudly as they touch. The image of the scene blurs as I faint on the chair from which I'm listening. My forehead and temples strike the tiled floor. I feel the thrust of my leg muscles from a great distance. My cheek dragging along the tiles, the thud of my skull against the bottom of the door. It is within that dream that I feel myself dying, and an angel marks the ground and the bottom of the door with its imprint, its wing. It is morning. I shall not be able to open my eyes and move my lips again, at least for the length of a visit or two, until the 13th, the day of the declaration of martial law in Poland, the country where our mother spent her childhood and adolescence. And the following night, in the jolts and starts, as I surface to consciousness and sink below, apnea, dyspnea, as if I were stirring, over, under, to one side and the other of a kind of amniotic fluid. The athletic journey begins. I'm in the intensive care unit at the Brousset Hospital. What little is left of my body is strapped to the automatic hospital bed. My nostrils, mouth, and other orifices jammed with tubes, clamps. I have the bit in my mouth and I hear myself from inside the coma snorting like the most robust and furious of horses. Then, an immense esplanade appears below a range of triangular and shining mountains. Cheers rise from several crowds, raving and tossing as if on an ocean floor. Is it myself being cheered, but for what? Hoisted upon the fists of one of those masses, or is it someone else, Rodo, a lone head standing behind a high platform before me, dark stare and harried speech. No central voice, but four high-pitched cardinal echoes of a ghost of a voice coming out from between his teeth like foam and drying like a cocoon on his lips. Is it an effect of what they do to the inanimate object of myself? Intubations, catheters, limbs pulled, but the ghosts of what limbs and organs have constituted me on the other side are pulled, quartered as if by the horses at Damien's torture. Long ago in childhood, when summer reverberates and feels and throbs all over, it begins to circumscribe my body along with myself, and my body gives it shape in turn. The joy of living, of experiencing, of already foreseeing dismembers it. This entire body explodes. Neurons rush toward what attracts them. Zones of sensation break off almost in lumps that come to rest at the four corners of the landscape, at the four corners of creation. Or else it is a fusion with the world, my disappearance into all that touches me, all that I see, and into all that I have yet to see. It is hard then to endure being but a single self in the face of all these other selves, and to stay motionless despite the agitation of my senses, to stay motionless in that space where we leap, bound, fly. Better to die as a child can die than not be multiple, infinitely multiple. It is such great suffering that we cannot share ourselves, that we cannot be shared like a feast among everything that we wish to eat, among all sensations, among all beings. The shredded corpse of this small animal laying there is me, if it could only be me. A torture den, cries, imprecations, orders, female, complaints, moans, pleas that turn to shrieks, to suffocations, to groans. There is scuffling, spillage onto the tiled floor, smells. Later, they tell me it is an old woman intubated by the nurses and who grows slack and whose feces are shoveled away. Then, is it the effect of the transfusions and the drip feed, glucose progressing through my veins, that alters my blood? I'm swept into a corridor, veins of spaces at great speed, thrown into spatial ruins in broad daylight. Then the suction pulls me in again. That pummeling, those slides where I also spin on myself, leave me with something like contusions, aches that I feel in the dream itself. In fact, they are visions, not dreams, for they are too human. They are lived dreams, premonitions, announcements, judgments that seize me and deflect me back from one time to another, but toward the origin. The very joints of my soul make me suffer. They afflict me. A jointed soul at the head of a team with its straps, its reins, that my arms must drive towards Egypt. The chamber of echoes again. With a start, the crack of an eye, I see aerosols, tube openings that curve toward me with their rings, serpents, plinth dogs, and enter my mouth, storage depot, but where? The nightstand at the foot of the automatic bed has no tray for objects, sealed envelopes. I'm in a tomb in ancient Egypt with its domestic sculptures, its offerings and messages. Must I move farther back in time to an era before writing, as if to surprise it from behind, before its hieroglyphs, in its signs, their meaning erased by history, like my own signs whose secret will disappear along with me. The soul is without a gender, without a species. Thus, in this funeral journey, am I human? Am I animal? Am I God? Am I object, idea? I have always seen the gaze of a God staring out from a dog's eyes. I'm the one that wrote that cliché in the tomb, like a little dog. It torments me, and because of it, I wish, and have, it seems, enough strength to whisper it to my friend M one night, that all I have ever written would disappear from the surface of the earth. My punishment is that such an era of art remains, and I am therefore drawn and sinking into an expanse of columns, of peristyles, and of moving draperies, the raised expanse of a temple palace around which dogs await their prey, a long, strong viper of green and gold whose body hangs along the wall, head facing to attack. Thus, as a child, I name Athalie, queen, obstinately renegade and wrathful, a viper that hangs from a hole in our garden wall. My eye cracks open once again, and the vision of a carton of fruit juice, Rhea, the grip of that mother goddess, wife of time, takes me back by force toward antiquity, the minus period of the time before the birth of Jesus Christ, the time of death, that time before Christ, that space-time on the edge of which this medical treatment keeps me hovering. The graphs moving upon the monitors of the equipment plugged into my heart and brain, before my eyes that part with difficulty, so shrunken have my eyelid muscles become, draw the trace, the proof of my historical trajectories. Everything during the year that I have suffered to foresee is accomplished, even up to this, that those photographers who have shot my ruined head, which then newspapers have reprinted, so that my kin might gaze on me in France and beyond, accompany me there. They do not catch me, like monsters, which they shall remain for me for a long while to come. End of December, I can sit up on the edge of the bed with a nurse propping my head upon my neck. They transfer me from intensive care to the medical floor through a tunnel filled with pipes and cables, which runs beneath a large courtyard illuminated by a large sun. My silhouette rocks like a caricature on the wheelchair. Here I am on the medical floor, housed in the same corridor, a few doors down from the room where my mother's sister died in late 1979. Across from my bed, an adult man, pale, with bulging eyes, a shining skull, eats his meal on his tray. I'm facing the bottom of a water hole of a lake, and that is an amphibian larva which lies before me. Several hours later, my first erection of what, between my sunken thighs, sets me back into dreadful normality, which the nurse immediately confirms, speaking to me. Sir, Guyotat, sir. In February, relocated to the Jeanne d'Arc clinic in Saint-Mandé, my renutrition begins. My skin itches all over because of the flesh forming around the muscles, the cartilages and bones. After 2 days of moderate gymnastic activity and writing, the same distress again, but inversely in a growing body without that immense deterioration. On a Sunday evening, the last visitor's gone. The intern on duty acts the fool in front of me, and since I'm still struggling to speak at that time, he asks me to repeat after him the line from Mallarmé, abolished bauble of sonorous inanity. Does he think that I have been unable, and will I be able again, to write so beautifully, so ringingly, and melodiously, so despairingly, vanity of sounding soul, and I at length? But he, abolished bauble of sonorous inanity. So returning to my palate, to my heart and breath, the very thing that killed me, the splendor that killed me, that desiccated me, those tempting sounds that brought me beneath its shadow. After the clinic comes the time to enter into gentle depression, slow healing. Instead of the enchanted palace we think we have won by the sweat of our dead blood, the reward for this run through death is a disenchanted world without notable depth and color, drab gazes that no longer see you, voices always directed towards others since you have returned from too far, a daily obligation to survive, a heart that only pumps blood and blood that is no longer warming. You must wait without anger, apply yourself daily to eating, to sleeping, to cleaning yourself, to dressing, to walking, all of it almost alone and without even yourself by your side. Try in jolts, so awkward, to take heart. Patience, patience.
Well, we tend to eat dinner very late in India, and it shows on our paunches. But I find it's sort of getting to dinner time in this part of the world. I thought I'd read a little bit about food. That's not really about food, it's really about blossoming, unlikely friendship between the narrator of this book, who's a young Indian man, and the much older Uncle Lance. And the book is called Sly Company of People Who Care, and it's set in the Caribbean, in Guyana. And the genius of the Caribbean is basically to take any word and turn it into a synonym for a genital. And with food especially, fish and pork and masala. And there used to be a very famous soca song called Wine Up On Me Curry. So I'll just start. There came a period that we devoted our Sundays to cookery. These days began with Uncle Lance appearing in a shaky white Toyota AT192. With 3 short blows, he'd announce his arrival at 5:30 in the morning. Off we'd go in the drizzling day clean. He would lean suspiciously on the steering wheel as he drove, squinting at the windshield as if alarmed to find a world beyond it. He never, ever pushed the needle beyond a hair's breadth of 30 mph, an aspect I called attention to frequently. You ain't see me drive by. I could reach Georgetown to Kwakwani in 100 minutes. You know where is Kwakwani? You can't know is where. You only been here a couple of days. Oh, my foot heavy. But you gotta think for the other fool on the road, right? That is what an upstart like you don't understand. But nobody on the road, Uncle Lance, I protested. It had a time, right? We had nice zebra crossing on the road. They would paint them things steady, could see them stripes from a mile, shining upon the road. The stripes now vanish, the zebra dung extinct. But nobody on the road, Uncle Lance. And jackasses them does take an angle into the crossing. You're not allowed that. You gotta start one side of the crossing and walk over till you reach the other side. Now people cutting in from any part of the road, causing one bundle of confusion, and they jump in upon the zebra and them say, look, I spun the zebra. By 6 a.m., the wharf in Meadowbank was already crowded. Riches were everywhere. Smell of river, stink of fish, blood in the morning. Alive in the drizzle, filthy-footed, we'd hustle with zeal. It was serious fare, no jokey trench fish, no hasar and huri and patwa and them kind of thing. There was shark and trout and 10-kilo julbakas and their pricey heads, whiskery catfish and high-water fish, mounds of shrimp and bangameri and pakus, the tails twitching behind stupidly flat heads like the fronts of woebegone school shoes. One watched the skinning of the paco with sorrow. It was so honest and foolish. When a cutlass was introduced into its mouth, it would bite and not let go. The skinners were vicious. They stood at wooden platforms and let rip at the creatures, splotching customers with scales and entrails. It was an unfathomable violence, such a contrast to India, where men with mustaches sat tranquil on their blades, making meditative incisions as if in penance. On the way back, we would stop at the Sunday market in La Penitence, and here, shopping, chomping on a pink guava or a cassava ball, Uncle Lance might break into a calypso, and it had to be said he did pretty well for a voice like his. He knew all the folk songs, the shantos and calypsos, the Bill Rogers and Dave Martins. At Sheriff Street, the session would begin. We might make a herb and pepper batter for the shark and lash her with tennis rolls and hot West Indian sauce. The catfish we might curry with raw mango. I might impress him with my breakthrough invention of pumpkin with Kerala and butterfish in the same pot. Uncle Lance was an expert chopper, saying a Chinese gal taught him, and he could do 2 onions in the time I did 1. His stance at the stove was a hand on hip, a heavy lean back, eyebrows arched, a man bemused. One day, a good 3 months before Christmas, we thought to make the Patagi Christmas dish of garlic pork. We drove out to Monrepos on the coast looking for fresh pig. The capped ladies giggled with Caribbean punning. We ain't giving up me pork. Here na Anusha, the buy does want pork. You giving out you pork? Anusha giggled, we all giggled, and she supplied us 2 fatty pounds. At home, we washed and lowered the pig into a transparent bowl. We threw improved cloves of garlic. We de-leafed the fine leaves of thyme from its stalks and sprinkled them in with holy abandon. We halved the firebomb very peppers and threw those in with final fingerfuls of salt. We covered the pig with vinegar and fastened the cellophane over the top. It was to be left like this for 3 weeks. A pig, she would breathe in every last rumor of flavor. The bowl we placed in a doily, such a furnished house. No matter what, I could not stop staring at it. Lancelot Banarsi too eyed it heavily because every other sentence contained the words, garlic pork by garlic pork. After 2 hours, we decided to fry one piece, just to see. An hour later, a quarter of the bowl was done. And 3 weeks on, 2 pieces remained. Damn fine pieces though. And in this manner, in between rambles, assignments, and long days in the country, I became Sunday friends with Uncle Lance. And through him, I met many people in this easy, informal world. From the vantage of the Sheriff Street balcony, standing red rum on ice, we watched people. Uncle Lance would divide passing citizens into 2 categories. The first was Western Union people. Them does live upon remittance like leech. You hear that biggest industry in Guyana, sugar? I say no, it's Western Union. And the second time was Visa Q people. Them just come from cutting around at the embassy. Are they going for cut around? Isn't their eyes by? Focus upon the eyes. He held each type in equal contempt. He could never be a Western Union man, a blasted parasite. As for the second, he thought of himself as a modern man. And the Caribbean man is a modern man, right? A mix of culture. And so this was the reason that he'd never leave here, never cut around at the embassy. He did not want to leave modernness to go to backwardness. Often he would point out someone and start a story about them. You see the man there? He had the longest dong in Guyana. How you can be sure, Uncle Lance? Every single lady at the night refused the man. The moment the man pulled down his pants, they frightened. Another time, he identified a chicken fucker. A chicken fucker, I asked. Once he regaled me with stories of a man who had more girl problems than anyone. He lived in the same kitty house that I'd lived in. He liked country gals because he could feel a boss man around them. One such girl he reduced to tears by asking for a blowjob. Is what job me got for do now? Is wash job, me done finish. Cook job, me done finish. Clean job, me done finish. Why is this blowjob now? Another girlfriend would bite him and beat him and threaten to take her own life, and often Uncle Lance was awoken at nights to shouts of, "Catch she, Lancey, catch she," as the girl took position at the window. It was possible, of course, that Uncle Lance was spinning yarns, but when we saw Kevin pass again an hour later, he confirmed the stories. And he supplied one from the previous evening, too. A girlfriend had found a used condom in his bed. Hear what I tell she. I tell she I was trying it on. Oh, boy. And like Kevin, people frequently came upstairs for a bounce, sometimes with friends and cousins, taking a call from somebody, inviting them over too. As a result, our lives grew manifold, and it triggered in me at certain moments a strange but satisfying sensation that I was now living here. As Guyanese of all ages and genders cooked and enjoyed it, the open kitchen raged with activity. A number of pots were sparked at once, here a corn soup with dumpling, there a fish stew with okra, and the range had an oven, and a trout might bake in it, heaped with eshallot and thyme and fresh jute, the starburst of five-finger, the sour of passion fruit. A whole fowl might go in massaged with jerk seasoning and washed down with pristine coconut milk. Sticks of cassava might be roasted on the flame and smothered with butter, and people, foremost among them Lancelot Banarsi, fighting over the bun, the charred bits. The wind blew through all the half-open doors, but our flames never outed. Afternoons ran on to evenings and nights, cackling and narrating, arriving and departing. Old stalwarts and sporty lads and vibrant university gals and all in between, finishing eventually in a great drunken fornicating wind-down somewhere. Or else, at Big Market, Big Mama's. She was a colossal loving lady, Big Market, Big Mama, shining black in a loose t-shirt, a head wrap, and a long flowing skirt, a face that wanted to feed the world and make it a happier place. She was Mama Creole. All the movements of the New World met in her. Chow mein from the Chinese, met MG from the Africans, pepper pot from the Amerindians, roti and curry from the Indians, baked chicken from the Europeans, the menu dripping off her tongue like honey when you ask, "What you got for me tonight, Big Mama?" Sometimes there were trips to somebody's cousin's friend's plot of land by the Blackwater creeks off the highway. Trips that killed me with nostalgia even while I lived them. Driving back a pickup, Silvery Lane pelting barebacks, leaves dancing on the mud trail, branches snapping back onto faces, puddles like lakes forded in the sinking vehicle, bush cook and red rum and drenched cricket, jamun splattered purple upon the wet soil. The remarkable freedom of a forgotten and irrelevant place on earth. but Uncle Lance himself retreated, said he'd been up those highways too many times. Thank you.
우리는 둘이입니다.
We're two people up here.
이 책은 엄마에 관한 책입니다.
This book is about a mother.
엄마를 잃어버린 얘기예요.
It is a story of a mom who got lost.
엄마를 잃어버리고 그 다음에 온 가족들이 엄마를 찾아다니면서 그동안에 엄마와 자기 자신과가 어떤 관계였는지를 추적해가는 작품입니다.
And so after the mother was lost, it's a story about how the whole family is looking for her. And in the process of that, they are all finding a different part of the mother that they never knew about before.
이 소설 안에서 잃어버린 엄마를, 실종된 엄마를 찾느냐 찾지 않느냐는 그닥 중요하지 않습니다.
And in the story, it is actually not important that they actually find this mother or not.
소설을 읽는 동안 자기 자신의 엄마를 잠깐이라도 한번 생각해 보게 됐다면 엄마를 찾는 거라고 생각합니다.
While reading the story, if you have the opportunity to find your own mothers in your own hearts, then I believe that the mission has been accomplished.
한국어가 음악처럼 들리겠지만 이 책의 처음 부분을 낭독해 드리겠습니다.
I'm sure Korean will sound a little bit like music to you, but I'll be reading the first part first.
한국어는 짧게 하고 영어는 좀 길게 하겠습니다.
And we'll be reading the Korean part a little shorter, and the English part will be reading the full excerpt.
엄마라는 말은 영어로 mom입니다.
The word mom in Korean is 엄마.
자꾸 듣다가 엄마라는 말이 나오면 맘인가 보다 그렇게 생각해 주세요.
So every time you hear me say 엄마, just know that I'm saying mom.
엄마를 잃어버린 지 일주일째다. 오빠 집에 모여있던 너의 가족들은 국리 끝에 전단지를 만들어 엄마를 잃어버린 장소 근처에 돌리기로 했다. 일단 전단지 초안을 짜보기로 했다. 옛날 방식이다. 가족을 잃어버렸는데 그것도 엄마를 잃어버렸는데 남은 가족들이 할 수 있는 일이 몇 가지 되지 않았다. 실종 신고를 내는 것, 주변을 뒤지는 것, 아무나 붙잡고 이런 사람 보았느냐 묻는 것, 의류 쇼핑몰을 운영하는 남동생이 인터넷에 엄마를 잃어버리게 된 이유와 잃어버린 장소와 엄마의 사진을 올리고 비슷한 분을 보게 되면 연락해달라고 게시하는 것, 엄마가 갈 만한 곳이라도 찾아다니고 싶었으나 이 도시에서 엄마 혼자 갈 수 있는 곳은 없다는 것을 너는 알고 있었다. 글을 쓰는 사람이니 문안 작성은 내가 해라. 오빠가 너를 지명했다. 글을 쓰는 사람, 너는 해서는 안 될 일을 하다가 들킨 것처럼 기미치 붉어졌다. 과연 내가 구사하는 어느 문장이 잃어버린 엄마를 찾는 데 도움이 될지. 1938년 7월 24일생이라고 엄마의 생년월일을 적는데 아버지가 엄마는 1936년생이라고 했다. 주민등록상에만 38년생으로 되어 있을 뿐 실제로는 36년생이라는 것이다. 너는 처음 듣는 얘기였다. 아버지는 그 시절엔 다 그렇게 했다고 했다. 태어나서 100일을 넘기지 못하고 죽는 아이들이 많아서 2, 3년 키워본 다음 호적에 올렸다는 것이다. 38이라는 숫자를 36이라고 고쳐 적으려는데 오빠가 신상 명세서인이 38년생으로 적어야 한다고 했다. 이건 우리가 만드는 전단지이고 여기가 동사무소나 구청도 아닌데 사실보다 등록된 것을 적어야 하나 의문이 들었지만 너는 묵묵히 36이라 적은 숫자를 다시 38로 고쳤다. 그러면 7월 24일이라는 엄마의 생일은 제대로 된 것일까 생각하면서 너의 엄마는 몇 해 전부터 내 생일은 따로 챙기지 마라 했다. 아버지의 생일이 엄마의 생일 한 달 전이었다. 예전엔 생일이나 다른 기념할 일이 생기면 너를 비롯한 도시의 식구들이 제이시의 엄마 집으로 이동하곤 했다. 다 모이면 집게만 22이었다. 엄마는 식구들이 모이는 왁자한 상태를 좋아했다. 식구들이 모이게 되면 며칠 전에 새김치를 담그고 시장에 나가 고기를 끊어오고 치약과 칫솔들을 준비했다. 돌아갈 때 한 병씩 나눠주려고 참기름을 짜고 참깨, 들깨를 따로 볶아 찧었다. 가족들을 기다릴 즈음에 너의 엄마는 동네 사람들이나 시장통에서 만나는 사람들과 얘기할 때 단연 활기를 띠었고 은근히 자부심이 배어나는 몸짓과 말투를 보였다.
It's been 1 week since Mom went missing. The family is gathered at your eldest brother Hyung-cheol's house, bouncing ideas off of each other. You decide to make flyers and hand them out where Mom was last seen. The first thing to do, everyone agrees, is to draft a flyer. Of course, a flyer is an old-fashioned response to a crisis like this, but there are few things a missing person's family can do, and the missing person is none other than your mom. All you can do is file a missing person report, search the area, ask passers-by if they have seen anyone who looks like her. Your younger brother, who owns an online clothing store, says he posted something about your mother's disappearance, describing where she went missing. He uploaded her picture and asked people to contact the family if they'd seen her. You want to go look for her in places where you think she might be. But you know how she is. She can't go anywhere by herself in the city. Hyung-cheol designates you to write up the flyer, since you write for a living. You blush, as if you're caught doing something you shouldn't. You aren't sure how helpful your words will be in finding Mom. When you write July 24th, 1938 as Mom's birth date, your father corrects you, saying that she was born in 1936. Official records show that she was born in 1938, but apparently she was born in 1936. This is the first time you've heard this. Your father says everyone did that back in the day. Because many children didn't survive their first 3 months, people raised them for a few years before making it official. When you're about to rewrite 38 as 36, Hyung-cheol says you have to write 1938 because that's the official date. You don't think you need to be so precise when you're only making homemade flyers, and it isn't like you're at a government office. But you obediently leave 38, wondering if July 24th is even Mom's real birthday. A few years ago, your mom said, "We don't have to celebrate my birthday separately. Father's birthday is 1 month before Mom's. You and your siblings always went to your parents' house in Cheonguk for birthdays and other celebrations. Altogether, there were 22 people in the immediate family. Mom liked it when all of her children and grandchildren gathered and bustled around the house. A few days before everyone came down, she would make fresh kimchi, go to the market to buy beef, and stock up on extra toothpaste and toothbrushes. She pressed sesame oil and roasted and ground sesame and perilla seeds so she could present her children with a jar of each as they left. As she waited for the family to arrive, your mom would be visibly animated, her words and her gestures revealing her pride when she talked to neighbors or acquaintances. In the shed, Mom kept glass bottles of every size filled with plum or wild strawberry juice, which she made seasonally. Mom's jars were filled to the brim with tiny fermented croaker-like fish or anchovy paste, or fermented clams that she was planning to send to the family in the city. When she heard that onions were good for one's health, she made onion juice, and before winter came, she made pumpkin juice infused with licorice. Your mom's house was like a factory. She prepared sauces and fermented bean paste and hulled rice, producing things for the family year-round. At some point, the children's trips to Cheonguk became less frequent, and Mom and Father started to come to Seoul more often. And then you began to celebrate each of their birthdays by going out for dinner. That was easier. Then Mom even suggested, "Let's celebrate my birthday on your father's." She said it would be a burden to celebrate their birthdays separately since both happened during the hot summer, when there are also 2 ancestral rites only 2 days apart. At first, the family refused to do that, even when Mom insisted on it. And if she balked at coming to the city, a few of you went home to celebrate with her. Then you all started to give Mom her birthday gift on Father's birthday. Eventually, quietly, Mom's actual birthday was bypassed. Mom, who liked to buy socks for everyone in the family, had in her dresser a growing collection of socks that her children didn't take. Name, Park So-nyo. Date of birth, July 24th, 1938, 69 years old. Appearance, short salt and pepper permed hair, prominent cheekbones, last seen wearing a sky blue shirt, a white jacket, and a beige pleated skirt. Last seen, Seoul Station subway.
낭독할 때 들으셨겠지만 이 소설은 너는 이렇게 들리는 게 좀 특이할 겁니다.
I'm sure you heard while we were reading the story, but something very unique about this novel is that we actually refer to the person as you.
이 소설은 엄마를 잃어버리고 가족들 4사람이 등장하는데 엄마를 제외한 다른 사람들은 모두 2인칭, 3인칭으로 되어 있습니다.
So in this story, there are a total of 5 people who come out, or 4 people, I'm sorry, and except for the mother, everybody referred to as a third person instead of I.
실종된 엄마만 나는이라고 말합니다.
And only the mother is referred to as I.
여기서 방금 나온 너는 딸의 시선입니다.
And the current story that we just read is from the perspective of the daughter.
이 책의 첫 부분을 읽어드렸으니까 지금은 잠깐 라스트 부분을 낭독해드리겠습니다.
Since we read the first part of the book, now I'll read the last part of the book.
너는 이끌리듯이 사람들 사이를 헤치고 피에타 상 앞으로 나아갔다. 막 숨을 거둔 아들의 시신을 안고 있는 성모의 단아한 모습을 보는 순간 너는 얼어붙는 것만 같았다. 저것이 대리석이 맞나? 죽은 아들은 아직도 체온을 유지하고 있는 듯했다. 아들의 시신을 무릎에 놓이고 내려다보고 있는 성모의 눈은 고통에 잠겨 있다. 죽음이 지나갔을 것이나 모자의 몸은 손가락이 물컹거리며 들어갈 것 같이 육감적이었다. 어미됨을 부정당하고도 아들의 죽음에 무릎을 내준 여인. 그들은 살아있는 듯 생생했다. 누군가 등을 쓸어내리는 것 같아 너는 얼른 뒤를 돌아다보았다. 너의 등 뒤에 엄마가 서 있는 것 같았다. 너는 깨달았다. 뭔가 잘못되어 가고 있다는 생각이 들 때면 습관적으로 엄마를 생각하며 살아왔다는 것을. 엄마를 생각하면 무엇인가 조금 바로잡히고 내부로부터 뭔가 다시 힘이 솟구쳐 올라오는 것 같았으니까. 너의 엄마는 잃어버린 뒤에도 엄마처럼 전화를 걸려고 했다. 너의 습관은 엄마를 잃어버린 뒤에도 엄마에게 전화를 걸려고 했다. 엄마에게 전화를 걸려다가 멍하니 서 있던 날들. 너는 피에타 상 앞에 장미 목줄을 내려놓고 무릎을 꿇었다. 무릎에 누인 그 죽은 아들의 겨드랑이에 끼어있는 성모의 손이 움직이는 것만 같았다. 너는 고통을 감당하다가 죽음에 이른 아들을 안고 있는 성모의 비탄을 바로 바라볼 수가 없었다. 너의 귓속을 메우고 있던 모든 소리가 끊기고 천장에서 쏟아져 내리던 빛도 사라졌다. 이 세상의 가장 작은 나라의 성당 안은 깊은 침묵에 잠겼다. 상처를 입은 입술 안쪽 연한 살갗에서 계속 피가 배어나왔다. 너는 자꾸만 고이는 피를 꾹꾹 삼키며 겨우 얼굴을 들어 성모를 올려다보았다. 너의 손바닥에 저절로 방탄유리를 짚었다. 닿기만 한다면 성모의 슬픔에 잠긴 눈을 감겨주고 싶었다. 어젯밤에 한 이불을 덮고 잠들었다가 오늘 아침에 그 이불 속에서 깨어나 엄마를 안아본 것처럼 생생하게 엄마의 채취가 되살아났다. 어느 해 겨울 바깥에서 꽁꽁 얼어서 집에 돌아온 너의 어린 손을 그 투박한 두 손으로 감싸고 부엌 아궁이불 앞으로 데려가던 엄마. 이런 손이 얼음장이구나. 아궁이불 앞에서 너를 품어놓고도 어서 따뜻해지라고 내 두 손을 감싸고 비벼주던 엄마에게서 맡아지던 냄새.
As if you are being dragged forward, you push through the crowd to the front. As soon as you see the graceful image of the Holy Mother holding the body of her son, who had just breathed his last breath, you feel as though you are frozen in that spot. Is that marble? It seems that her dead son still has some heat in his body. The Holy Mother's eyes are filled with pain as her head tilts down at her son's body laid across her lap. Even though death has already touched them, their bodies seem real, as if a poking finger would dent their flesh. The woman who was denied her motherhood still gave her lap to her son's body. They are vivid, as if alive. You feel someone brushing against your back, so you look swiftly behind you. It's as if mom is standing behind you. You realize that you habitually thought of mom when something in your life was not going well, because when you thought of her, it was as though something got back on track, and you felt re-energized. You still had the habit of calling mom on the phone even after she went missing. So many days you were about to call mom, but then stood there, numbly. You placed the rosewood rosary in front of the Pietà and kneel. It's as if the Holy Mother's hand, cradling her dead son under his armpit, is moving. It's hard for you to look at the Holy Mother's anguish as she holds her son, who has reached death after enduring pain. You don't hear anything, and the light from the ceiling has disappeared. The cathedral of the smallest country in the world falls into deep silence. The cut in the tender skin on the inside of your lip keeps bleeding. You swallow the blood that pools in your mouth and manage to raise your head to look up at the Holy Mother. Your palms reach out automatically to touch the bulletproof glass. If you can, you want to close the Holy Mother's sorrowful eyes for her. You can sense mom's scent vividly, as if you two had fallen asleep under the same blanket last night, and you embraced her when you woke up this morning. One winter, mom wrapped her rough hands around your young, cold ones and took you to the furnace in the kitchen. Oh my, your hands are sheets of ice. You smell the unique fragrance of mom, who huddled around you before the fire, rubbing and rubbing your hands to warm them. You feel the Holy Mother's fingers, which are wrapped around her dead son's body, stretching out and stroking your cheek. You remain on your knees in front of the Holy Mother, who barely manages to raise her son's hands, clearly marked by nail-inflicted wounds, until you can no longer hear footsteps in the basilica. At one point, you open your eyes. You stare at the Holy Mother's lips, beneath her eyes, which are immersed in sorrow. Her lips are closed firmly, with a grace that nobody could disturb. Deep sighs escape your lips. The Holy Mother's dainty lips have moved beyond the sorrow in her eyes towards compassion. You look at her dead son again. The son's arms and legs are splayed peacefully across his mother's knees. She is soothing him even in death. If you told anyone in the family that you were going on a trip, they would have taken that to mean that you had given up on finding mom. Since you had no way to convince them otherwise, you came to Rome without telling anyone. Did you come here to see the Pietà? When Eubin suggested that you join him in Italy, you might have unconsciously thought of this sculpture. Perhaps you wanted to pray in this place, pray that you could see for one last time the woman who lived in a small country attached to the edge of the vast Asian continent to find her, and this is why you came here. Then again, maybe that wasn't it. Maybe you already understood that mom didn't exist in this world anymore. Maybe you came here because you wanted to plead. Please don't forget mom. Please take pity on mom. But now that you see the statue on the other side of the glass, sitting on a pedestal, embracing with her frail arms all of mankind's sorrow since the creation, you can't say anything. You stare at the Holy Mother's lips intently. You close your eyes, back away, and leave that place. A line of priests passes, probably on their way to celebrate Mass. You walk out to the entrance of the basilica and look down, dazed, at the piazza surrounded by long cloisters and enshrined in brilliant light. And only then do the words you couldn't say in front of the statue leak out between your lips. Please, please look after mom.
Yes, I'm a Norwegian writer, and I live in Norway. I've written a book about walking. Because a lot of years ago, my best friends told me it would be a good, since I walked a lot, I crossed a lot of countries in Europe, crossed Italy and Spain, and Greece, Sweden, and Denmark, and Germany, England even. They told me it would be a good idea to write a book about walking. And my publisher said, yeah, it's a good idea to write a book about walking. It will be a bestseller. If it's good, you will be rich. Not a millionaire, but you will earn some money. So I was often told that this was really a good idea about writing a book about walking. And I said, I don't like good ideas. In fact, I hate good ideas. It's the worst thing I know, good ideas. Good ideas is for people working in commercials or design or film industry or banks or in prison or something. Good ideas never make good books. So I wouldn't write a book. And the years went by and I still walked. And after 7 or 9 years, when the idea really was bad, I decided to write it. It took me 2 months. It became a bestseller. It's translated into a lot of languages that I don't know. I earned a lot of money, and I stopped walking. So today I only take taxis and aeroplanes and trains and boats, and I nearly don't. The book is. It's not a book that starts somewhere exotic in India or Nepal. It always starts in my own apartment. All my journeys starts in my own apartment. I leave the apartment, take the stairs down, and then I walk left. One day I decided, okay, I'll walk left. I can walk for a week. Or maybe next day I decide to walk right, or just right ahead. And I always see where it leads me. And I always walk in a suit, because not a Hugo Boss or Armani, but I buy them secondhand. I've seen the gypsy do that, old suits with very good quality, and they're really good to walk in. But in Norway, after 2 or 3 hours walking, you come to the mountains. So that's the best part of it. We're walking in the mountains with a lot of people with Gore-Tex, and I come walking in my suit and always a white shirt, and then who's he? Where is he going? And I walk really quick, and I carry some whiskey, and I always smoke cigarettes, and in Norway this is really radical. I mean, so this is the best parts. But and then very often I walk together with a friend, and he has this Gore-Tex. He has a blue jacket and a yellow. He's really funny to look at. But when he's in the mountain, he's really dominating everything. But then you always get to a city. In Romania, we walked in Transylvania. We come to Bucharest, and I wanted to go to a bar, and he said, I can't go in this. No, you're right. You have to go back and sleep somewhere. But then I had a suit, so I just walked into the bar and. So there are some advantages with this suit. I will read very shortly, but this trip actually started because I sat for 2 years in a bar. I won a literary prize. It was rather big, so I didn't have to work. So every day I went to this bar. I sat there for 2 years, smoked a lot, and drank a lot. And my friend said, "You can't sit there; it will kill you. You have to do something. So let's go for a walk." And we did, and the walk ended in Istanbul. Why not begin with a street? The street and the route I walked up and down almost every day for more than 2 years. Björnsonsgatan, dirty and car-choked, working-class housing in rows on each side of the shadow that resembles a road, a traffic artery, bloodless and cold, a narrow pavement past factory lots, the filling station down towards Danmarksplads, the city's darkest traffic light intersection. a miserable street, punctuated with repressing relics, a dying tree, that ruinous wooden house, and a hatch smothered with exhaust dust, the window where she stands pulling off her cotton jumper. A miserable street, my home and favorite route into the city. The street opens onto the technical college and the Kroonsminde Stadium on the right, and the right Heis blocks and Solheimsviken at the left. I pass the trainee chefs on the stone steps of the college. They stand smoking under their white, airy cook hats, as if they're balancing the clouds on their heads. 7 or 8 trainees, chefs, next to the trainee hairdressers. Easy to spot because of their hairstyles, red and green shocks of hair, and every size and shape. One of the girls have a shape and a bare stripe from her forehead to the nape of her neck. It looks as if the street runs straight to her head. And I carry on down towards Danmarksplas, down under the traffic tumult, right or left through the underpass. The tunnel divides. Today, I take the right fork, and in retrospect, I should be grateful that I didn't choose the left. Because a bit further along on the right, just past the Forum Cinema, after the slope leading to the lake, on the bridge where the fish lie dying on the tarmac, the sunlight strikes a traffic sign, and I'm struck by an unexpected shaft of happiness. It simply says, "You are happy, here and now, for no reason." In this instant, you're happy, unreasonably, like a gift. There's no other way to describe it. I have no cause to be happy, hungover and dejected after 4 days of solid drinking, living on in my filthy house in a miserable street, sleeping on mattresses without furniture, deserted by the woman I thought I'd be able to live with. I'm in the process of destroying myself. A grim and determined effort at self-destruction, drinking and going to pieces. And suddenly, I'm happy. Why? Because the sunlight picks out the road sign? I have to stop and catch my breath. And I feel a warm and jubilant transparency inside of me. Thoughts reawaken and lose their dullness. It's a thoroughly physical experience. My thoughts brighten, and I start walking again, lighter this time, up towards the prominence of Nygårdshöjden and the city center. And slowly, it draws me. You're happy because you're walking. Going to the dogs, crawling on all fours, belly on the floor, face down, a scar across the eyes, light, it strikes like a cudgel, a wound someone's whistling in. She whistles in my blood, there's whistling in my head. Who is whistling? Get closer, crawl across the floor, in under the table, a puddle of alcohol, lap it up, roll over and lay down under the table. You see half or less of everything, a waist perhaps, naked feet, and in the evenings, the hem of a nightdress. The edge of the table hides the face. It's your father, your lord and master, that beautiful back, the sweet and the shirt. We're moving again. The empty room, so liberatingly empty. A lamp, well, something to love, a loving lamp, getting undressed, switching off the light and going to bed. If only you knew. How can you know? What do you know? He finds the cigarette, crawling under the table. How good it is to crawl, to drown yourself. How good it is to drink. Fill yourself with oblivion. Drown. The falling darkness under the table. Like living in a house within a house. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, a dog house. You crawl out, roll against the wall, stick the tongue of the belt buckle into the electrical socket. There, you see the light, you feel the power. Now you can see how he rises, gropes his way out to the door, struggles and jerks, jumps for the door handle and reaches it with his mouth, bites it downwards, metal against his tongue, barks upon the door and runs out into the corridor, raging and making all the noises that will make someone come and take him away. Before I go, let's tot up all the joys we know. Drinking, standing, swaying in the bar, lifting the glass, lighting the cigarette, talking without knowing what's being said, a ceaseless stream of oblivion received by any chance mouth. And the next day, crawling through town, up the stairs, through the door, across the carpet, looking up at the window, playing with children, talking to them like one demented. Loving, I mean pouncing upon her, putting on her clothes, panties and tights, vest, jumper, pulling on her hat and coat, and seeing her off and running at full tilt now, back from nursery school, round the corners and down the stairs, storming into the flat and pouncing on her, pulling off her jumper and tights, panties and wets, getting her into bed. I mean, my life in a nutshell. Sleeping, a pure pleasure. Waking, an earnest pleasure. Waking each morning, the earnestness of life. It's a joy that life is earnest. You wake, that's a joy. You wake to the earnestness. Life wakes, not just you, but your neighbors and the shop, the streets and the noises and the air she no longer breathes. The joy of life. I love life. The older I get, the more I love life. The more I'm frightened of dying. This surprised me. I'm not getting any wiser with the years. On the contrary, it's almost as if I'm approaching pure and all-encompassing stupidity. The joy of standing still for a long time, or being at home, shopping up in the flat, locking the door, turning down the lights, sitting by the lamp and the desk, writing or not writing. The joy of my desk, of objects, the ashtray and the lamp, the window, the chairs, the carpet and the doors. The joy of things created by human hands. This house, these stairs, this lift, all the doors and square shapes, books and letters, this desk, this pen, created by language. It's Tuesday, and today, for the first time, I consider the joy of being able to speak. I rejoice at being able to think. Today I rejoice at being able to write. It's Tuesday, and I rejoice that it's Tuesday. I haven't forgotten the joy of traveling, the thrilling ecstasy of being on the move, sitting in a car and racing along, motionless and breakneck speed. I love driving fast, fast and far, out of the city, in the darkness, driving at night, out of the city and back again. Or short trips on bus or a boat, out and back the same way. Above all, I like ferries or trains. They don't alter their original plans. We forget the fundamentals, the joy of waking, of being able to stand up, of going to the kitchen and drink a glass of water. A glass of cold, cold water. I don't know if you can remember the triumph of raising yourself up from the floor, standing there, swaying, that sudden control and childish joy of being able to walk from room to room. Walking, that's what I like doing most. It's Tuesday. I'm going out drinking. It's a foolish joy. The joy of swaying and losing your words and your balance, lurking and crawling, almost like being a child again. Thank you.
Hi everybody, how's everybody doing? Good. Yeah, I'll keep it pretty short. This is about a guy who's young Scottish guy, about 21. He's from a working class family in Edinburgh. He's gone to university up in Aberdeen. he's got a nice girlfriend up there, and everything in life is going fantastic for him. So, in true Scottish fashion, that's exactly the time to hit the self-destruct button and fuck everything up completely. So, what he's done is he's had sex with his girlfriend's best pal, and he's got involved. He's got into heroin, and he's basically become a heroin addict. And his moral compass has gone all over the place. And all he does at Aberdeen is walk, kind of hunting down heroin, basically. Another day of stoic ambulation through the city, scalped by licks of hard wind. Union Street paraded before me like tarnished family silver with a long-standing Brasso bypass. Edinburgh could be bleak, but Aberdeen really took the fucking piss. A life could be wasted waiting for the sky to change from grey to blue. But I'm spending more time here, not going home so much. Here I had Fiona, my studies, and my walks. And the main reason my trips back home had curtailed, I'd hunted down a source of gear. I met this guy called Don. Started going to his place regularly. He sorted me out. I kept it all from Fiona. She thought I was in the library. I discovered that when somebody loves you, they'll pretty much see what they want to see, provided you aren't reeking of booze or the scent of someone else. And we were still having sex, though less often, me making the excuse of needing to study more. She was no mug, but even though we were in a relationship, we both had independent lives as well. Edinburgh was close enough for me to tell her I was going home for the night, or on some pretext or other, usually to keep an eye on my grieving family. Oh, one thing I should add, he's got this badly handicapped brother who's autistic, but has also got motor neuron disease, and who's died recently. And he's got another older brother who's in the British Army in Belfast. This is the 1980s. But be on Don's couch in a section of Aberdeen where few students or lecturers ventured. It was Saturday morning when Fiona next came round. And this time, my bearing seemed to confirm the impression that my absence from the classes throughout the week had given her. Namely, that something was wrong. Mark, where have you been? Are you all right? I think I've picked up a bad dose of the flu. You look terrible. I'm gonna go down and get you some Lemsip pet. Can you do me a photocopy of your Renaissance notes? Of course I can. You should have told me you were suffering like this, you dafty, she said, kissing my sweaty brow and heading outside. She returned half an hour later with the medicines. Then she left me to go to where she worked on a Saturday. I waited for a bit and anxious to get away from the room's stale chemical smell, my smell. Couldn't she smell me? I could smell me. I followed her out and down the road. Fiona did volunteer work on Saturday mornings with deprived kids, rowdy wee urchins who loved her. Jug-eared, budding psychopaths would go all flushed when she greeted them. Hard-eyed, gum-chewing wee lasses would suddenly sook and crawl for attention. A few weeks ago, while on my wanderings, I clocked her meeting a bunch of them outside the Lemon Tree Theatre. She looked happy. She was a straight peg. She talked about us finding a flat together next year. Then graduation, then 9-to-5 jobs, and another flat with a mortgage. Then engagement, then marriage, then a bigger mortgage on a house, children, expenditure, and then the 4 Ds, disenchantment, divorce, disease, and death. For all her protestations to the contrary, that's who she was. That's what she expected. I knew, but I loved her, and I thus fought to conceal the ugliness that she brought out in me. I knew that standing in the street, watching her patiently herd the cat-like kids into the theatre, that I could never be like that. I could never have her, really have her, in the sense of giving myself to her. Or perhaps I was just being crazy. There was more than a degree of acceptance for me in her world. My mother and father's aspirations were decent. Decent? I fucking hated that word. It made my skin crawl. But they cared. In the bookshop, I took up a spying position, listening to them in the adjoining cafeteria. There was a specoid, gawky and enthusiastic, with Fiona and the kids. "Oh, boys and girls, can you put your pens and paper away and come with me just now?" She would eventually be with somebody like him. Maybe a cooler version, who got a ride once in a while. Perhaps a bit more of an arrogant cunt, who might eventually fuck her around. But in essence the same. Dress them in an anorak and stick Coke bottle spectacles on their coupon, or in a rugby shirt and pump them up with muscle. It makes no real difference. A straight peg is still a fucking straight peg. I headed home. When Fiona came back, I was sitting up waiting. I hadn't taken anything besides 2 lemsips. Her hair's wet with the rain. She dries it with a towel she produces from her backpack. The kettle's on and I make some hot chocolate. Knowing the thing I've got about wet hair, Fiona glances to the bed, then realizes that my level of sickness precludes grabbing her and throwing her onto it. "You're shivering, Pet. You should go and see the doctor." Can I tell you something? As soon as her pupils expand and she says, "Of course, Mark, what is it?" I know that I can't tell her what I want to tell her, but in order to conceal that fact, I have to disclose something equally profound and important. "My wee brother," I hear myself say, almost shocked at my own voice, like somebody else in the room had snitched us up. I've never told anybody this before. She nods, wrapping her hair in a towel and picking up the steaming mug. I clear my throat as she coils into the lotus position in the chair. Wee Davy had sort of worked out. He had this thing about Mary Marcus, who reads the Scottish news on telly. You might have seen her. She's got, I suppose you'd call them Italian looks, kind of lots of makeup, big attention to the eyes, and bright red lipstick. "I think I know the one you mean, Pitt. In the evening." Aye, that's her. Well, I sort of noticed that wee Davy got agitated when she read the news to camera. His breathing became deeper. And you couldn't really miss what was happening in those pyjamas or tracksuit bottoms. Fiona nods understandingly. There's a red mark on her jeans at the knee I haven't seen before. Probably paint from some workshop with the kids. I used to have to look after him around tea time on a Friday. I finished early and my mum worked part-time in the Whiskey Bonds office and Dad would be buying stuff for his stall in the market. When the Scottish news came on, I'd see Davy stare at the screen, his cock visibly erect. And I started to think, he's fucking 15 years old, the poor wee bastard. Get what I mean? Yes, Fiona said, sadly but analytically, like he's got a sexuality, but no outlet for it. Exactly! I exhaled, just so relieved that somebody fucking well understood. So I decided that I'd wank him off. Fiona's eyes briefly hit the floor and then rise to meet mine. I can't tell what's in them. Her lips pressed tightly together. She's not telling me to carry on, but she isn't telling me to stop. I take a deep breath. So I did. It seemed to comfort him. Oh, Mark! I know it's my brother and it's a sexual thing, so it wasn't a sensible move. I can see that now. At the time, though, all I was thinking about was alleviating his distress, like I used to do when I beat his back to help drain the fluid off his chest cavity. So I did it. The poor wee bastard went crazy and blew off a load in what seemed like a split second. Then he fell into this contented doze, and I've never seen him so at peace. I cleaned him up and he had the best sleep of his life. So I thought, no harm done. What happened? She unravels herself and lowers the mug to the floor, her eyes never leaving mine. He grew to expect it. Autistic kids are programmed to routine, like clockwork, meals the same time, bed the same time. It became his sort of Friday treat. If he hadn't had his other physical issues, he'd have been constantly doing it for himself, all day and all night. But then, the other days when the news was on, he'd look at the screen, then at me, and shout and emulate that horrible cry, "Mary! Mary!" Of course, I couldn't help him out with everybody else being in the house. Fiona's expression is now distinctly one of distaste. She sits stiff and cross-legged in the chair. Aye, they all thought he was shouting Marky and found it touching. Only he and I knew he was shouting Mary, I explained. And Fiona's now so still, it unnerves me. Do you think I was wrong? No, she says hesitantly. Of course not, Pet. It's just because you not tell them, your family, about your Davy. We don't have that sort of relationship, it's my parents. A pensive nod as Fiona picks up the mug and cradles it in her strong, thin fingers. Well, I kept jerking him off every Friday to the image of Mary on the box. It wasn't always easy. I mean, things got increasingly difficult. She'd be reading in the studio and he'd just be about to blow. Then suddenly they'd cut to an outside broadcast and he'd crumble and start to scream and sometimes go into a coughing fit. It went on and on like this. It got so that to get him off, you really had to go for it. Well, one day, I forgot about our Billy getting home on leave for Belfast. Didn't hear him sneak in the way he used to do to surprise my mother. He came up behind us on the couch, just as Mary came back on the screen. Fiona's eyes widened. So, he caught you doing this to your Davy? Your Billy? Worse! Wee Davy's knob exploded and he shot off this wad that flew up into the air and Billy copped a lot of it like a party streamer down his face and the front of his army uniform. Fiona's hand goes to her mouth. Oh my God, Mark, what happened? He hauled me and Davy apart, dragged me off the couch and booted me in the side. I got up and even though I got a couple of licks in, I took a bit of doing. Wee Davy was screaming. The neighbours heard the racket and Mrs. McGoldrick banged on the door, threatening to call the police, which probably saved me for a real fucking paggering. We both calmed down, but when my mum and dad came back, they knew we'd been fighting. So they quizzed us and we each told our sides of the story. It started raining outside. I can hear it crackling on the window pane. Mark, what did they say? They more or less took his part. They called me a twisted, manky little fucker. I'd not that long left of school. I couldn't articulate what was getting it by doing that for him. Disabled people's right to sexuality! I punched my chest as if she's questioned me, but she's keeping stumph, nodding in some kind of sympathy. But through her silence, I suddenly see how it all looks. I knew that if she had a disabled sister, the last thing in God's earth Fiona would contemplate doing, would be to give the lassie a frig over, say, some star from a soap opera. For the first time, I have to acknowledge that I might be, on some level, a totally sick cunt, or at least misguided. My voice drops in anguished plea. He was in torment. I was only trying to give the poor wee fucker some release. It's not as if I got any kicks out of it. For a while, Fiona gazed out of the fading light at me, almost blankly, but her face had the composure of someone perfectly at peace. Can't you tell them now? Your mum and dad? I've tried it once or twice, but it's never been the right time. Besides, I think their minds are made up about me. She blows out through tight lips. Why don't you write them a letter? Set it all down in black and white. I don't know, Fee, it would be like I was making more of it than there was, I said, suddenly feeling sick and tired, slumping back into the chair, then lurching forward, wrapping my arms around myself. It obviously means something to them, no, Mark, and to you, or you wouldn't be telling me. I know, I say, looking up at her in shabby defeat. I'll think about it. Thanks for listening. Of course, love. Fiona smiles sadly, acknowledging my sweating and twitching. I'll get off then, Pet. Let you get some sleep, she coos, rising and touching my sweaty forehead with her palm, then kissing it. Her arms round me feel heavy and constricting, and I'm relieved when she departs. As soon as a decent couple of minutes have passed, I'm down to the payphone, calling Sick Boy at Montgomery Street. I go on a rant, telling him about Don, asking him what he was doing about gear. He says to me, "You've no interest in anything but smack." When protest seems pointless and futile, I realise for the first time that this statement is basically true. It makes me think, you really need to stop this. I don't register anything else until the pips go. You're going to have to stop this right now, or you're going to fuck everything up. So what I did was I got outside and walked through the cold, squally city and down Union Street. Thank you very much for listening, folks. Thanks for your patience. Cheers.